tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. This evening I'd like to talk to you about the law of Kamma. In the Dhammapada, which is a collection of short, pithy teachings of the Buddha, the very first teaching is about the law of Kamma. All phenomena, it says, are preceded by mind. So whatever mental state we are experiencing, the results of that will follow us, like a shadow, or the wheel of an ox cart follows the footprints of the ox. If we speak or act with a pure mind, then the results will be correspondingly. If we speak or act with a defiled or corrupt or impure mind, then the results will correspond. So this is essentially the law of Kamma in a nutshell, but the Buddha also said the workings of karma were so intricate that if one tried to understand all of the details of the law of Kamma, it would drive you crazy. It's one of the 4 inconceivables. So I won't try to explain every detail of the law of Kamma because that would be inconceivable, and I don't wish to drive you crazy. However, this will just be a taste, enough of a taste, enough to get us thinking about the law of Kamma and how we can apply that in a practical way in our daily life. So we may be more familiar with the popular term karma, right? For example, if that's the Sanskrit version. Often that is bound up with ideas of a bit of mystical fatalism, as if, well, it's just his karma, right? As I had no choice, it's just my karma. As if somehow things are fixed. Now, the Buddha was very clear that things are not fixed, and there is the idea of things being predetermined. He denied that that's the way the cosmos works. So when he talked about karma, and I'll use the Pali term, K-A-M-M-A, instead of the Sanskrit karma. So when he talked about karma, he was talking about action, a dynamic relationship every moment. How we respond to this moment will then create our future. So if you imagine the entire history of the universe has led through its series of causes and conditions and results to this moment, this particular moment. The entire history of the universe has led to this moment, and there's nothing that we can do about that. We can't change that. We can be happy about that. We can enjoy the way things are. We can be upset about the way things are, but we can't change it. It's already happened. But how we respond to that, that's within our control to change, right? So how we respond to this present moment will then literally begin to change our future. So even if we have very deeply ingrained habits, and it feels like, well, I have to respond this way. Feels like there's no free will. I just have to respond in this way. Then we do actually have the ability through training. Sometimes it takes a bit of mental training to be able to have the strength of mind, to be able to reply to this present moment in a wise way. Right. So we may talk about good karma and bad karma, and that's an easy way to talk about good and bad. And if you do good, you receive good, and if you do bad, you receive bad. But it's actually much more complicated than that. And even the terms good or bad are very subject to personal interpretation. Right? I mean, so how do we, sometimes we use the word good just based on what gives us pleasure. You know, if a food is delicious, say, hey, that sandwich is really good. You know, that artwork is really good. Right? Why? Because it gives us pleasure. It gives me pleasure. Right? You say, how was the weather today? Oh, the weather was really good. Or you say the weather's no good today. So why? Because it either gives us pleasure or it doesn't give us pleasure. Right? So it's more of a hedonistic sense of the use of good. Right? Or sometimes it's just a utilitarian way that we use the word good. If something works, then we call it good. If something doesn't work, we say it's no good. Right? But in a moral sense, even in a moral sense, what we consider good or bad will often be dependent on particular cultures or eras. What may be considered good in one culture is not considered good in another culture. What's quite acceptable and praiseworthy in one culture is considered quite worthy of blame in another culture. So using these words good and bad, even though we might use them just for convenience sake, an ordinary way of speaking, the Buddha was much more precise in how he used terms. So he referred to the Pali terms kusala and akusala. Now, whenever we translate into English, sometimes it's difficult to come up with terms that really encapsulate the essence of what we want to explain. But kusala is what we translate as wholesome now. Right? Generally, that's the accepted word that we use, wholesome, and akusala, unwholesome. So the Buddha was much more precise in how he defined wholesome and unwholesome. That which is arising from defilements, anything overt or subtle that it's arising from impure intentions is considered unwholesome. And I'll speak a bit more about that, what constitutes defilements. Okay. So the essence of Kamma, in the way the Buddha used the term, doesn't specifically have to do with the actions of our body. It doesn't specifically have to do with what we say. It doesn't even specifically have to do with what we think, but it's the energy of the mind that leads to thoughts, speech, and action. All right? So in Pali, this is called cetana. I'm going to call this intention in English. Now, of course, the word intention in English may not fully cover this idea that the Buddha was trying to convey. Because sometimes we say, we're careless. And we say, oh, I didn't intend to do that. We do something, we didn't intend to do that. I didn't intend to, run that red light and cause an accident. But it doesn't mean we didn't have some karma involved with that, because maybe we were careless. So this movement of the mind, which leads to thinking, which leads to speech, which leads to action, this is the essence of Kamma. This is the essence of Kamma. And Kamma itself is action. The results of Kamma has a different term we call vipaka. I'm just say the results of Kamma. Right? So you have Kamma, which is the active, dynamic part of this process, and then you have the corresponding results. Often in everyday speech, we may confuse them. Right? We just kind of use the term a bit more loosely. So the Buddha was actually very precise in how we use these terms. So when we talk about intention, right? Now, intention is very closely related to motivation. But let's say you have the intention to harm, or you have the intention even to kill. Now, the motivation might be, could be a whole range of why we intend to kill, and that will affect the results. So the law of Kamma is not a simple one-to-one relationship. You do this, you're going to get this result. Right? You do that, you're going to get that result. There's a wide range of causes and conditions and mitigating factors which will affect the result. There are certain aspects that we can look to of the law of karma which will help to explain general patterns. Right? So, for example, if you have the intention to, say, kill, for example, one factor that will be that will affect the outcome is what is it that we intend to kill. Right? This is just one of the many factors involved. So, for example, if you intend to kill a mosquito, and if you intend to kill an elephant, and you go through with it, even though the intention to kill is the same, the elephant, because of its very nature, will carry a heavier result. Right? It's not to say there isn't any bad karma in killing a mosquito, because even mosquitoes are sentient beings that have a right to live. Right? But the object, that will make a difference. The intensity of the intention will make a difference. Right? So if we have a weak or fuzzy intention and we follow it, then that will have a less strong effect. The result will tend to be equally fuzzy or weak. But if we have an extremely strong intention, if we're highly motivated to do something and we follow through with it, then that will make a greater impact on our minds. So this law of karma, you can just see within our own minds. If there's a very strong intention, that will leave a strong imprint, and then the results tend to follow accordingly. When we talk about wholesome intentions, what is it exactly that we mean? Right? If you are acting on kindness, acting on movement of the mind of generosity, that has to do with giving or giving up. If you're motivated by compassion, there's a whole range of wholesome intentions, which by their very nature will lead to wholesome results. And for many of these intentions, you don't have to wait for future lifetimes. You don't have to wait very long at all to see the results. If you have an intention of compassion or kindness, immediately that feels pleasant. Right? If you have an intention of anger, immediately that is unpleasant. Physically it's unpleasant. Mentally it's unpleasant as well, even though there is a certain addictive factor to being angry. Something is pleasant about it, because it reinforces our sense of self and me being right. But mostly, even just the intention of being angry is already immediately unpleasant, even before other results come back at us. Right? So any movement of the mind that's coming from aversion, even subtle sense of frustration, right? This is going to be unwholesome. It's going to lead to unpleasant results in the future. Right? It doesn't have to be extreme anger, right? It doesn't have to be extreme anger, but sometimes just the persistent niggling, frustration, aversion, dissatisfaction, is that where that creates a very strong habit, and then that can really, really deeply affect our level of happiness, right? Leading to depression, just chronic worrying. Worrying is just based on, the idea of something happening in the future that we don't like. This idea, and there's aversion to this idea of what might happen in the future, and just that, it's very painful. And this is how we can measure the results of good and bad karma. Right? The Buddha was not so concerned about results such as wealth, status, how we look. I mean, all these things are also based on a law of cause and effect as well, right? But what he was most concerned about was essentially the level of happiness in our minds. And the level of happiness in our minds is based on how pure our minds are. The more we experience anger, the more we experience a sense of greed, selfishly desiring things, that by its very nature is going to lead to unhappiness. So this is the way the Buddha defined unwholesome states of mind, unwholesome intention, and anything that's arising from the roots of greed, anger, or delusion. Now, rampant greed generally in society, even in mainstream society, is considered a negative quality. However, there's many more subtle forms of greed which are pernicious. They're destructive. They're not conducive to our own happiness. And just because something is praised in society doesn't mean it's actually going to be good karma. So this is where mindfulness and awareness becomes extremely important. Watching our minds, closely observing our minds every moment. You see how important that is, because even if we're not paying attention, we're still making karma all the time, right? Often it's habitual. Sometimes it might be culturally conditioned. Right? Depending on what culture we find ourselves in, depend on what habits we have, depending on what family we grow up in. All of these things will condition, what intentions are habitually developed. So once we start to see more clearly what is it that is motivating us, then at least we begin to have the opportunity to exert some influence on our future. Otherwise, we're just reacting like a robot. Something happens and we react in a particular way. Someone pushes our button and there's a conditioned response. But someone can still push our button and we're aware, but then we realize, no, what kind of future do I want to have? Do I want to have a future which is just going to be an endless perpetuation of this habit, especially if it's a negative habit that's not beneficial? So no, we don't have to do that. We have the ability to overcome that and respond in a wise way. So these intentions that arise from greed or from anger or frustration or from delusion. Delusion is essentially states of lack of clarity, not clear understanding, or misunderstanding the nature of reality. Anytime we have misunderstanding or just general confusion, right, that's going to also perpetuate, and that may be the most difficult of the intentions to see. By its very nature, it's cloudy, it's not clear. So closely watching our intentions moment by moment, and seeing, do these intentions, how do they correlate with our deeper values in life? How do they relate to a future that we would like to experience? Are they actually leading to benefit for ourselves and others? Why is it that we do what we do? How is it that we've ended up in this stage of life? Right? Everything that we have at this moment, at this particular phase of life, how is it that we've ended up here? Mainly, it's the result of actions and speech and thoughts based on our own intentions. Now, not everything that we experience in life is a result of our personal karma. Right? There are other factors of cause and effect at play, such as the weather. But what determines our level of happiness or unhappiness. Right? And most of what we experience in life is a result of our personal, the karma that we've made in the past. So in one sense, it's a relief to know that, because it gets tiring to blame all of our problems on other people. And just to be able to take responsibility, say, well, wherever I am at this stage in life, whether we like it or we don't like it, we take responsibility for that. Because blaming is the easiest thing to do. Blaming others, blaming the situation, blaming the government, just blaming. But actually taking responsibility for this particular situation, for this level of happiness or dissatisfaction that we experience. Right? Okay, well, this is really the result of how I have been developing my own intentions, and this is the result that I'm experiencing. So it's quite freeing in that sense to realize that it's not just out of our control. It's not just happening by chance. So then, the great majority of our practice, and specifically developing cultivation of the mind through meditation and meditation techniques, is based around systematically developing wholesome intentions. For example, you're developing loving kindness meditation. You're just over and over again bringing up this intention. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free of suffering. May they be free of pain. Right? Even if you don't feel overwhelmed by loving kindness at that moment, still, there is this sincerity of intention, right? A true sincerity of, actually, I do wish that other people be happy. Or even if there's someone that I don't like, I would wish that they be free of pain, be free of suffering. So systematically developing wholesome intentions and watching the results, then we start to see, this is actually a dynamic process, and this is something we can do in daily life. This is not just some theoretical exercise. We can play around with it. We can see, let's see, if I develop this mental state and I speak with this mental state, what's the result? Right? We can try. You say, you say something out of with a heart full of kindness, and see what the result is when you meet a stranger. Or you can experiment. You meet a stranger and you say something out of anger and hatred. You see what's the result, right? Probably not very beneficial, but that's how we learn. That's how we learn. Sometimes we make mistakes, and then we reflect. Well, what was my intention in saying that? What was my intention in doing that? And say, it fits the definition of unwholesome. Okay, maybe it's not such a mystery that we're not feeling happy, or we're feeling discontent, or there's disharmony. So then we learn something. And maybe then how about visualize that same situation, and I responded with a different intention, right? Would that be possible in the future? And the next time, maybe it is possible. And then we see what the result is. And you say, there was a situation that a few years ago would have really made me angry, but now I was able to respond in a way which is kind of kind and open-hearted and big-hearted, and the result was totally different, and it feels great, it feels wonderful. And just step by step, we start to see that this law of Kamma, there are causes and effects that we can see. You don't have to wait to future lifetimes. There's a lot that we can experience just within this lifetime. Even the physical effects, right? I mean, if we habitually develop certain states of mind, it will affect our body if it becomes a habit, right? If we have certain mental states that lead to tightening in certain parts of the body, right? if you're worried or fearful, these muscles become tight, and then gradually over the years become hunched over, or if we're regularly angry, all right, we start to get certain wrinkle patterns based on our anger. If we're regularly smiling, we tend to have smile lines, right? So even physically, we can see the results of karma over a period of time. You don't have to wait. It's not, there's many aspects of the law of karma that are not particularly mystical. You can see if you drink a lot of coffee, then you have to go pee, right? There's a certain cause and intention, and there are certain results, and you see, okay, right. The Buddha was not mostly concerned with how much coffee we drink and how much we have to pee. However, that same principle, once we start to understand, well, if it works on these very basic daily life situations, then how about if we apply it to our own spiritual liberation? Right? Would it be possible to maximize happiness and peace of mind and a sense of developing insight and understanding? If so, what are the causes that lead to that? It's not just willy-nilly. It's not just that some people are born with a greater sense of wisdom. I mean, maybe they are, but it's not. It is possible for everybody to develop these qualities. So what are the causes and conditions that actually lead to happiness? Right? And it takes some clarity of investigation. Many of the things that our mainstream society says lead to happiness don't actually lead to happiness. So many examples of people who have everything they should have to be happy. Every box is ticked. There should be, they should be very happy. They have everything that they've desired. All their desires are gratified, and yet, still they're not happy. Why? Because they haven't thoroughly investigated the true causes of happiness. So this is where understanding the law of karma makes a big difference, and it's not just out of our control, or at least conventionally speaking, we have the ability to influence our future. Now, another factor that does come into play is in looking at the results of karmic acts that we've done, looking at the vipaka, the results. All right? How we habitually live our lives will make a big difference in how the result is felt. Let's say you have two people. One person is generally living a very wholesome life, very kind, very generous, usually in a good mood, helping others, life full of service. But then maybe one day that person's in a bad mood and says something aggressively. Now, the result of that will be, to a great degree, buffered by all of the, we say, wholesome or good karma that person habitually does. Right? Now, if you have a second person, they say the exact same thing with the exact same intensity, exact same mind states, but habitually, they don't do much good karma at all. Right? They're not living a wholesome life. Now, they will tend to experience the results much more quickly and much more heavily. Right? So if we make an act of unwholesome karma, it can be delayed or softened by the effect of habitually doing lots of wholesome karma. Right? It doesn't mean that it's erased, but it can be greatly mitigated. The Buddha gives the example of, if you, let's say you take a teaspoon of salt and put it in this glass of water, and then I drink it, it's going to be rather unpleasant. It'll be very noticeable, at least. It will not be particularly refreshing. And if you take that same teaspoon of water and put it into one of the ponds of our monastery, the exact same amount, but it then disperses into a large pond, and then you dip this glass in and drink it, you will hardly notice the result. So similarly, if we make an act of unwholesome karma, we say something, we do something that we know it's unwholesome, but okay, we're not perfect. But generally, we're doing lots of good in our lives. Then it would be like putting a teaspoon or tablespoon of salt into the big pond, and then the results won't be noticed so dramatically. Right? So that's one of the factors that we can take into consideration, and it gives us motivation to try to do as much good karma as possible, especially once you start seeing the correlation between our intentions and the positive results. Saying, wow, this is really within my control. I can really do something here to make a positive difference in my life, and then you see it has positive benefits for other people around us. And that starts a positive feedback loop, and you try to, more and more are encouraged to make as much good karma as possible. Right? Or in relationships, for example. Now, if there's a great degree of trust in a relationship, and then one of the partners makes a mistake, and it's recognized as a mistake, then because generally in the relationship there's a great degree of trust, then that can be forgiven. But if a relationship already has a very low level of trust and it's kind of on the edge, and then someone makes a mistake, that can be enough to just be the breaking point. So how we habitually live our lives will make a big difference. Because of course, until we're quite a ways down the path, we're going to make mistakes sometimes. We're not always going to be able to be generating wholesome intentions constantly, even if we're motivated, right? It's a full-time job. Wholesome intentions all the time. Sometimes our strength of habit just comes up and we respond with anger or selfishness or greed or delusion. So the Buddha didn't teach the law of karma or understanding of the law of karma for us to be materially successful. It's true that if you act and speak in certain ways with certain intentions, and if you're good at it, you can make money, or you can be successful in the world, or you can kind of fulfill your desires to a certain degree, right? If you're good at it. But the mastery of the law of karma, in the Buddha's way of looking at it, was for developing deeper and deeper levels of peace of mind, which lead to deeper and deeper levels of understanding, which eventually lead to insights that completely uproot our delusion, completely uproot all of the roots of anger and greed. Right? So even this whole process is based on a gradual movement towards more refined states of happiness. So if in the very beginning, we can look at more coarse forms of, if I do this, does that lead to happiness? If I do this, does that lead to suffering? Or why am I suffering now? And we look at the causes. Or why am I happy now? Everything seems to be going great. And we realize, oh, I did this, and these things came together, and my attitude has been like this, and right, that gives us encouragement. But then we take that on deeper and deeper levels, systematically through meditation, right? And gradually through seeing clearly the causes that lead to happiness, our minds will naturally incline towards happiness, and then we're able to let go of the things that we used to look to for happiness. So this whole process of gradually letting go of the coarse and developing the refined forms of happiness. And then even those refined forms of happiness, by comparison, we find even more refined forms of happiness, and we're able to let go of the moderate forms of happiness. So gradually this whole process, leads all the way to full enlightenment, which the Buddha considered the highest happiness possible for all humans. So this is the law of karma in a nutshell. Again, it's only just a brief taste of the many avenues that we could explore. So I want to make sure that I leave enough time for people to ask questions, and we can explore this theme a bit more further.
You mentioned intention and motivation, and as a slight distinction. Could you elaborate on that a little?
Let's say you own a horse, and you love this horse. It's like a member of your family. You love this horse, and one day this horse is racing and breaks his leg, and then you have to shoot the horse. Now there is the intention to kill an animal. There is the intention to kill, and you follow through with it. But you're not motivated by anger. You're not motivated by hatred. You're motivated by compassion. Right? So that doesn't erase the intention. It doesn't nullify the intention, but it's a moderating factor in that, in the result. Right? Now, if you kill a horse out of just being in a rage of anger, then the result's going to be quite heavy. Horses are beautiful things. But in the situation where you have to shoot your beloved horse because there's no way that he's going to heal, just to alleviate its compassion, then alleviate its pain out of compassion, then there is still a result. There is some negative karma there. There is some vipaka result from that intention to kill. Intention to kill is never wholesome. It's always unwholesome, but it is mitigated by our motivation.
My question is about our relationship to other people's circumstances and conditions, and the possible tendency to view that as karma, and the possible dismissal of other people's conditions and circumstances, and what our relationship is to that.
Right, exactly. Now, an unwise way of looking at the law of karma is you see people who are born into poverty or suffering, or they have an illness, and then you say, oh, it's just their own karma, right? It's their own karma. It's their fault. You can actually use it for a coarsening of the heart and blame the person for their own suffering. Right? Now, it may actually be true that they are suffering as a result of previous karma that they've made. But whatever situation that people are in, the Buddha always recommended, to empathize with them, and try to alleviate suffering anywhere that we see it. So, you have to be careful on that. It's like a misuse or a misunderstanding of the law of karma. It's like a little bit of wisdom that we have to be careful not to fall into the trap of developing a coarseness of heart. Saying, oh, it's just his own karma. It's just her own karma, right? It's their own fault. We blame the victim.
This question also has to do with other people. To what extent do we consider the way other people are implementing karma? And I guess to get really specific with this, something that I wonder about sometimes is all of my loved ones are non-vegetarians. I admit, I'm the only one. And, you know, they say, well, do you judge us? Do you think we're killers? Do you, no, that's, but I struggle with this. I don't know to what extent I'm supposed to, I don't know. Do I have any responsibility, I guess?
Yes and no. You know, when we live with people that we care about, we don't want to see them suffer. And if we see that they're sowing the seeds for their future suffering, then we sometimes want to help them, right? So that intention is wholesome. There's limits to what we can do, though. Right? First of all, usually people don't like to be told what to do. And so we have to be careful not to be coming from a place of, hey, I know better than you do. You're sowing the seeds of your own suffering. I'm wiser than you are. You're a stupid idiot. And you wonder why they don't like to hear that. Right? You say, why aren't they responding positively to my good advice? They are a stupid idiot, and I've told them it's the truth. You know, face the truth, buddy. So how, you know, we have to be sensitive. Sometimes, you know, every situation is different. Sometimes directly saying something, you say, I really care about you, and I see that I feel like what you're doing right now is actually going to lead to your own suffering in the future, because I've seen it in the past. You know, I could see it. And if it's coming from the right place, it's not coming from a judgmental state of mind or self-righteousness or holier than thou, then often they can be receptive to that, right? Or it plants a seed. Even if they may say, it may plant a seed. But often there's nothing we can do. People just have to learn their lessons. You know? There are some people who are stuck in suffering. I mean, when I first came back as a monk to the U.S., I saw so many people that, they're really stuck in suffering. Here, just do this. And I realized they don't want to hear that. They kind of like being stuck in their suffering. And even though they don't like suffering, they're kind of used to it. And it's familiar. And they don't really want to be shaken out of that. So it's like, okay, well, I can't, there's nothing I can really do there except maybe be a good example. I can be a good example, right? And don't underestimate the power of that, right? It's like if you have one vegetarian in a family and there's other kids around, all your nieces and nephews, and they say, why is my auntie doesn't eat meat, right? Plants a seed in their mind. By the time they're a teenager, they may think, that was really cool. I want to be a vegetarian too, right? So you just never know. But sometimes the best we can do is just to be a good example, or sometimes just a little word here and there. But it's limited.
You said that karma is action. Is non-action, does that suffer the same penalty if you do nothing?
Even if you have the intention to do nothing, that would still be considered action, right? It's still an intention, right? So that's why the English translations sometimes aren't, they can lead to their own confusion. But, for example, there was a tendency, particularly in some Indian traditions, that if you just do nothing, inaction, then you'll gradually burn up all of your old past karma, right? But even sitting still, that comes from an intention, right? All of our, just having the view and opinion, is bound up with intention. So there's no, you can't burn up your old karma just through trying to do nothing, because actually you're just making more karma, right? You're making different karma. Sometimes doing nothing is the right thing to do, sitting still. But, even sitting still and not acting or saying anything, it can still be a powerful action in and of itself. And you see, sometimes you see examples of this in society where, just sitting silently as a protest can actually be very powerful. And that is a powerful action, hopefully coming from a wholesome intention.
Thank you. I had so many different questions. I'm almost confused as to which one to ask, and I was going to respond to some of that conversation as well. But the last thing you just said about not doing anything, or about inaction, about taking an action, an image popped into my mind, and I'm sure you probably know Taekwondo, when he self-emulated.
Mm-hmm.
I had a Buddhist monk one time tell me that he had accrued for himself a great deal of negative karma with that action. And I couldn't see it. I didn't think, because he had taken a life his own. But to me, it had been, he was an arhat to be able to do that. And I didn't think that, so that would be the question that just popped into my mind.
Okay, well, I'll deal with that one first.
Okay.
And then we'll get to the others. So that was a very powerful image for the world, in the Vietnam War, when the first images of this Buddhist monk setting himself on fire. And we don't know the mind state of that particular monk, but from the note that he left, and from other people who knew him, it seems that he was motivated by, he was so moved by the quantity of suffering that he was seeing, that and how the world was ignoring that he felt something drastic was necessary in order to get the world's attention, to bring their attention to this. And I think in that aspect of his motivation, I think it was wholesome. The idea of bringing the world's attention to the suffering so that maybe that would have some effect in some way to begin to lessen or eventually alleviate the suffering that was being perpetuated by the war. Right. Now, as the example with intention and motivation, if there is an intention to kill, even to kill oneself, it doesn't mean your wholesome motivation alleviates that intention. It doesn't nullify it. There still is the intention to kill. And so there's going to be some unwholesome results, some painful results that come from that intention to kill a living being, even if it's oneself. But sometimes, in some circumstances, we're willing to take that on. For whatever reasons, we're willing to take on the negative result of this intention because we think the greater result is worth it. Right? In the big picture, it still feels like the right thing to do. At times in life, we experience moral dilemmas. The dilemma is like there's both ways have drawbacks, right? Both ways have drawbacks. So then we try to make the decision based on the least drawback. And sometimes we have to make decisions that we know there's going to be some negative karma generated, but we take responsibility for the result that comes from that, right? I mean, a lot of examples, right? So if your plane is being hijacked and you go and you kill the hijacker, right? Are you making good karma or bad karma? Well, you're still making bad karma, but there's also the intention of saving and helping other people's lives. So it's mixed, right? It doesn't alleviate or nullify the intention to kill, but you're willing to take that on for the greater good. So I'd be hesitant to say that monk created a lot of bad karma for himself. First of all, because I don't know his state of mind. right? I can assume what his state of mind is based on the note that he left, but I don't know that for sure. Certainly he seemed peaceful. What's that? Certainly from the video that I've seen, he seemed very peaceful. Even as his body was burning, he was not in a state of samadhi. He was moving, must have been experiencing intense pain, at the same time seemed calm, which in and of itself is impressive. It kind of indicates that he was coming from a peaceful state of mind.
Well, that was I had almost assumed he was an arhat, or they had achieved some kind of mental skill that allowed him to sit there and do that. But one of the things, the comment that I just made was that his heart didn't burn, and it's preserved in a shrine on that spot right now in Vietnam. So there was like I said, I had so many questions about karma. I probably will just corner you afterwards.
But go ahead. We still have a bit of time. So
well, and even in terms of like the vegetarian, I'm not a vegetarian. And I justify it in my own ways, but there are times in my life when I've looked at food, I've looked at meat, and I saw it like life that should, in a different way, or I've been vegetarians for different reasons. But never once has a vegetarian done anything preaching to me besides make me want to run out and get a cheeseburger. And I don't know if it's from where their intentions are, or that, like you said, no one likes being preached to, but
right.
One of the things on that note, though, one of the things that, there's these little bugs that we have they're called stink bugs that are taking over an area, and they're like mosquitoes. And for the most part, I try to catch bugs and let them go, and catch bugs and let them go, but not mosquitoes. I don't know what the bill's going to be for killing them, but I got a tab.
Right. So, killing mosquito, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It really depends on who you talk to. I mean, if you talk to the Buddha, he would say, "Oh, it's still an unwholesome act of karma."
Mosquito
if you
nets are better.
You talk to the average person in the countryside, no, it's a good thing. The more you kill, the less there are the
less malaria.
Right,
less
it's a social responsibility.
And mosquitoes' life, I mean, if you're comparing it to a human life, malaria and whatnot, but in terms of that, catching those bugs and killing them, I kind of made a decision that was another pest that I was going to do that with, but I tried to make not when I was angry or was irritated by the thing's presence. I would try and wait until does it make any difference if you take a minute and not be hateful before you flush it down the toilet?
May you be happy. It is a mitigating factor, yeah. I mean, even with mosquitoes, if you kill out of a sense of anger and frustration, you're being bit and you're just like, I hate mosquitoes, and you slap it, right? That's going to have a bigger effect in your own mind than if you just say, I'm sorry. Right? It's still not good. I wouldn't say it's wholesome, but it will have a different effect because of our motivation is different. Right? But killing, one of the karmic effects of killing is that it makes our heart more callous. And people tend to justify certain things as okay. But even people who maybe kill for sport, right? You can see there's certain logic to their reasoning, and you can understand, it's a free country. It's legal, kill living beings for sport, and yet beyond that, there's a certain natural law. I mean, the law of karma is not dependent on personal opinions. What's that?
I think you just said kill human beings for sport. Did I mishear you?
Living beings. I may have said human beings. Then we have to look to politicians and generals and the karma that they make. But let's say if we kill living beings for sport, then just the intention to kill hardens our heart just a little bit, right? And even if it's just a mosquito, if we're closely watching our state of mind, right? And just the subtle accumulative momentum that comes from killing a mosquito and feeling okay with it, killing a mosquito and feeling okay with it, has a different effect. It has a subtle hardening, a coarsening effect on our heart. Whereas in Thailand, where we were monks, there's like insects everywhere. I mean, it's really hard not to kill ants in Thailand. God, you have to be so mindful. There's ants everywhere. There's mosquitoes, and you've got diarrhea. You run to the toilet, and then there's ants in the toilet, and you can't just flush them down the toilet. You have to carefully scoop them out, and when you're walking on the paths, you can't just carelessly walk on the paths because you might step on an ant. You have to be very careful and mindful, and so that becomes a habit. And the habit we develop in these little daily life experiences of respect, there's a little bit of respect there, respect for life, and we're always respecting life. And then that develops into a habit. And our habits then become character traits, and our character traits then lead to realms of existence. Our character traits become stronger and stronger until that becomes what we call our personality. It's built up with just these little moments of, do I kill, or do I just kind of say, oh, maybe, well, and just blow it away? These are. That's every moment. Every moment, we have this opportunity to decide the direction of our future.
You've been speaking very thoughtful. Does Buddhism have dogmatic absolutes like most religions that I'm familiar with?
Well, it depends on how you define dogma. I mean, I would say there's no dogma in Buddhism. If you define it as there's a set of beliefs that you have to believe in order to be Buddhist, right? So in order to be a Buddhist, you have to believe this, this, and this, and this. And if you don't believe that, out the door, mate. So it's not that attitude at all. It's more like, well, Buddha said, well, this was his experience. This is what led to enlightenment. He says it's true universally. Let's give it a try, right? You test it out for yourself. You don't have to believe ahead of time, does the law of karma exist or not, right? Maybe you're predisposed to thinking it's all just happens by chance. The law of karma is just BS. Good people suffer, bad people thrive. There's no sense to it all. It's just by chance, Or you may think, no, it's all written in the stars, right? No matter what we do, doesn't make any difference because it's all predetermined. If you have those beliefs, then that's already karma. It comes from intention in and of itself. Our views, our perceptions, our opinions. But the Buddha said, well, just try, experiment, look for yourself, see. Law of cause and effect, right? What conditions, when they come together in this particular way, particularly the condition of our own intention. That's the key factor in the law of karma that the Buddha was concerned about. Our own intention. What role does that play in creating certain results? And then you kind of experiment. Does it seem to work or not? Are there results? And, pretty quickly you see there are results. And you think, okay, well, this part of the Buddha's teachings, it does seem to be verifiable in my daily experience. So, right, it doesn't mean that I'm automatically going to believe everything, in the ancient suttas. But so far, what I can see in my daily life seems verifiable. It makes sense, and I've tried it in my own life, and yeah, it seems to work, right? So that gives you a little bit more confidence, in the teaching to say, well, there are certain things I can't verify, like, Now, some effects of karma will be experienced in future lives, or in this life. The causes may not have been generated in this life to what we're experiencing, but it may have been generated in previous lives. So, well, do I have anything to prove whether there's past lives or future lives? For most of us, we would say no, right? But, well, theoretically, it can make sense, or just keep an open mind, right? And with the things that we can verify, that's where you place the majority of your attention. We can work with those things. And the things that we can't verify, we just keep an open mind. Don't believe anything blindly, but also don't dismiss anything blindly, because that's also a trap. You say, no, I don't believe in past lives. It's nonsense. So, well, what do you base that on? How do you know? Right? So how do you know there's no past lives? It's better just to have an open mind. It's more realistic. And it's like, well, I don't know for sure either way. I think it's a realistic way of approaching it. And, the Buddha was very practical. Almost all of his teachings come back to this life, what we can do here and now to create a greater sense of developing wisdom and all the causes that lead to wisdom.
I have a question about bad karma. You mentioned earlier that, it sort of manifests as unhappiness. But I feel like I come across people who have absolutely no awareness of their actions. And so does it manifest like more of a collective energy, or how does it manifest? I'm wondering. I mean, does it just affect us personally as unhappiness, or is there another way it can manifest?
Well, a lot of people that we meet may have a low level of self-awareness, but if you really look into their mental states, if you look into their mind, not just on the surface, you ask them, how are you? Oh, I'm great. Everything's great. But that same person, if you really look at their lives, they're going to be experiencing a lot of unhappiness, a lot of suffering, a lot of frustration, a lot of sense of dissatisfaction or depression or feeling unfulfilled. They're not living according to their values, or they're not achieving what they had hoped to achieve. These are all forms of suffering. So when you really look beyond the surface, often people really, really are suffering. Or there is definitely a correlation between how they live their life and their general level of happiness. You look at some people who, you get to know them, and they really do seem to generally be at peace with life. You think, well, how have they lived their life, right? For the most part, they're honest and trustworthy and generous, and they're really good-hearted people. And even people who may, on the surface, seem like they have everything, they've got it all, you don't really know what's going on in their own minds. Right? As a monk, often people will come to me and open up, and on the surface, they looked like they really had it together, and then they open up, and you realize their life is a mess. Right? So you have to look pretty deeply sometimes in order to see, especially with other people. We can learn a lot from other people. Sometimes other people's causes and effects are easier to see than our own. Right? This is very true in the monastery. We can really see other people's, causes and effects. They're doing that, and that leads to that result, right? And that's not good. But we may be doing the exact same thing, and we don't see it in ourselves. All right? So we can learn things from other people, but really, the most important thing is to carefully observe everything we say, everything we do, and say, well, what intention is motivating that? Or even just you're sitting in meditation and thoughts and memories are coming up, or future plans, or an obsession with trying to create some future plan. And so, well, what's motivating that? What intentions are being formed there? And then it can be quite revealing. You realize that, it's coming from fear. It's coming from insecurity, right? I mean, some people worry all the time. They hardly know it because it's become a habit. Worrying all the time, and it's coming from intentions of insecurity and fear. And so that's not going to have a result of being happy. And so it takes a certain amount of, what it takes to break that habit is how do we develop clear awareness, attentiveness, what we call mindfulness, like strong, clear awareness, not just of our surroundings, but also particularly of our own mental states. Our body, our speech, our mental state. And developing a very clear awareness moment by moment. And then we start to learn some surprising things about what's actually motivating us. Right? We may think we know why we're doing what we're doing, but if we look on a momentary basis, we think, oh, wow, it's actually because of fear, or it's actually because of, we're just trying to get praise, right? Or we're just, trying to get someone else's approval, or, right? And then we think, oh, well, that's silly. Right? And then you can start to change things. Otherwise, if we don't see it clearly, it's almost impossible to change.
Someone has written in a question, would killing a person be bad if death is the best that could be put to, would be best for that person to be at ease, or I guess relieved of some suffering?
Yeah, it's one of those moral dilemmas, right? There are certain circumstances where, say in euthanasia, for example, people may be faced with very difficult choices. Someone may be very depressed. It's hard to, it's easy to be judgmental about people who commit suicide and think, oh, that was a really bad choice. They made a bad choice. Why did they do that? Why did they create suffering for the people who love them? Say, well, you don't know how much suffering they were experiencing where, imagine if you thought the best option for you was to kill yourself. How much suffering people would have to experience for that to be the case. And then, you're not less judgmental about people who commit suicide. It doesn't mean that killing oneself doesn't have negative consequences in future lives. If you believe in future lives, if that is the way it happens, then they say committing suicide is quite bad karma, especially if it's coming from anger, aversion, depression, just wanting to alleviate suffering in the wrong way. But sometimes, people are faced with very difficult circumstances that they have to make difficult choices. Now, let's say you have people on life support. You have a relative who's on life support, and somehow it comes to you to make a decision of whether to continue that or not. And maybe even the person themselves has said, please do not prolong my life if it doesn't look like there's any possibility of having an active life again. Don't prolong my life, And then, but still, it's got to fall on someone's shoulders to make that decision. Yes, let's pull the plug, or no, do not resuscitate. Right? Someone has to make that decision, and there will be there's some karma involved if it leads to the death of a person. Right? But again, the effect will be mitigated greatly by the surrounding circumstances. It's not a simple one-to-one relationship. Cause the death of a human being and you get a certain result, right? No, it depends on all of these surrounding factors what the result will be. So if you're trying to alleviate someone's suffering, especially if it's their wish, to like assisted suicide, for example, if it's their wish and you help them, let's say you're actually the doctor who injects somebody with the poison that kills that person, even though it's their expressed wish that they die. Now that doctor is still going to experience some negative karma from that intention to kill. There's no way to erase that, but it's a very different result than if they had engaged in premeditated murder for profit, right, or out of anger.
Does karma applies to groups, family, nations, races? Does it?
Well, we talk about collective karma, right? The Buddha never spoke about collective karma. He always spoke of it in terms of an individual stream of consciousness. However, if you have the same group of people, a group of people in a similar circumstance with the same or similar intentions and leading to the same actions, then you will tend to get similar results. It's not identical. It's not that, a particular group or society has made collective karma and they all have to receive the same result as a group. But individually, if people are making similar decisions at the same time, then the results tend to be similar.
There was one question from someone who wrote in, how has being a forest Buddhist monk influenced your understanding of karma? Paraphrased.
Well, generally, as a forest monk, you have to develop a high degree of awareness. Everything in our lifestyle is constantly pulling us back to being mindful of our bodies, mindful of our mental states, mindful of the surroundings, mindful of the people that we're living with. Right? So everything is pulling us back to being clearly aware. The whole lifestyle encourages that. So with that, then there's this, when a thought arises, you quickly know it, right? You're just sitting, trying to do nothing, and still thoughts arise, intentions arise, motivations arise, but more quickly aware of them. And if you know it's unwholesome, you think, oh, you can kind of nip it in the bud more quickly. Or if it's wholesome, you think, oh yeah. My teachers have encouraged me to develop generosity wherever I can see to help somebody else out. In the monastery, don't be hesitant, help them out. The seeds that are planted from reading our teachings, from listening to teachings from our teachers, right, encourage us to act on our wholesome intentions. It's not like all intentions are unwholesome. I mean, we have many wholesome intentions, right? So when we're feeling motivated to be kind and caring, then to act on that and make much of it and develop it and perfect it. So these are some ways that being a forest monk has helped to shed some clarity.
What are the connections between ego and intention or acquisition of merit, and how can we skillfully employ ego for spiritual in spiritual progress?
Right. Now, with every step of our Dhamma practice, practicing the path of the Buddha, even when we're doing good things, our ego can get in there and ruin it, right? So let's say we're actually starting to, God, we've helped somebody else out today, and and yesterday I did that as well, and I'm really helping a lot of people out now. I'm really a good person, right? I'm really racking up a lot of good karma. It's like, boy, my karmic bank account's getting really big. Right? It's like, God, I'm a great person, right? And we can start to identify with it. Identification is the great pitfall. The law of karma in and of itself is an impersonal process. Even in our own minds, it's still an impersonal process. But if we identify with it, then we fall prey to the possibility of strengthening our sense of self rather than undermining the delusion of self. Now, we can't just jump into the ultimate way of looking at non-self. So there are skillful ways of using our conventional ego, our sense of self, in order to develop wholesome karma, right? I mean, basically, if we care about ourselves, and if we say, well, if I make a lot of good karma, it's good for other people, but it's also good for me, and it's going to create positive consequences, in the future for me. So, okay, out of compassion for myself, then that seems to be a smart thing to do, and you can kind of use that as a motivation, a way to help motivate us to do more and more good. Even something like generosity, it helps other people, but it also helps ourselves. And immediately, if we're really watching, when we give something up, when we truly give it up, there's a sense of relief. It feels good, it's pleasant, it's joyful, or it feels like a burden dropped if we truly give something up. Right? We thought, oh, yeah, we like that, right? It's pleasant. And so let's see if we can maximize pleasure in a wholesome way, rather than trying to maximize pleasure through gratifying our desires, which, that's an endless, hopeless, burdensome task. But if we start to look to, okay, the happiness that I'm seeking is actually in this heart already. Let's see if we can maximize that happiness. Still kind of coming from a little bit of, a little bit of ego there, a little bit of self-concern. I want to be happy. I want to be wise, right? I want to be, even just, I want to be a good person, or I want to be really generous, and I hope other people notice, right? I'm a really good person. I hope everyone saw that. I asked a really smart question. I hope everyone saw that, right? So there's all these little ways where our ego gets in there, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, but it's just like, try to use it in a skillful way, because eventually, even identification with the wholesome will overcome itself if we take the practice far enough.
If other people are intentionally being mean to you, they're creating bad karma for themselves. But how is your karma, why are you attracting these people into your life? Is that part of your own karma? Or is it just what they do is their karma and how you respond to it is your karma? Or do you ever have any influence over anyone else's karma?
Yes, it can be the case. If we find that certain patterns are occurring in relationships over a period of years with different people, I think, well, am I doing anything to kind of make this happen? And sometimes that is the case, right? Because it always seems like it's the other person's fault, or it's like, why are they being so mean to me? Or it's easy to, feel the victim in that. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it may have nothing to do with what you're doing in this lifetime. It's simply the other people, creating their own suffering. But it's always good to kind of reflect and check. Am I doing anything that is somehow attracting these type of people? Right? It may be the case, right? Can be the case. Certain. I think how some people go from abusive relationship to abusive relationship, and you think, well, are they doing something, right? Why they're getting themselves into these situations where then they become victimized. So, well, there's a certain amount of responsibility that we all have to try to investigate, right? It may not be the case that it has anything to do with decisions or intentions on our part, but it may be the case, that we've kind of made certain decisions based on intentions that have led to certain types of relationships and patterns, and you think, oh, maybe I have a role in this. So then you think, nah, it's just their fault. But yeah, it takes a big mind to really fully take responsibility for all of the karma that we make and wholeheartedly accept the results.